This is Sarah Jones on the Politicus Pod for Politicus USA's The Daily. It is the season to save democracy. Oh, optimism, how we have missed you. So let's unpack a little bit of good news. Last night, before we get to the good news, last night we learned the unsurprising and yet thoroughly unacceptable fact that Donald Trump Jr. was behind the plan to use state legislators to overturn the 2020 election results. Jason Easley wrote in Politicus USA, Donald Trump Jr. was talking about operational control as if the will of the people is something that can be ignored and twisted to suit the needs of an incumbent president who's lost an election. So it was really good news that Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer spoke on the Senate floor Tuesday saying about the funding of the government bill, I expect an omnibus bill will contain priorities both sides want to see passed into law, including more funding for Ukraine and the Electoral Count Act, which my colleagues in the Rules Committee have done great work on, and it will be great to get that done. That's the end of his quote. It might take some time, but it should be done before the holidays. Drum roll. Schumer also warned it's going to take, we're going to need a little bit of time beyond this week to get an omnibus done. To avoid a shutdown this Friday, the Senate should be ready to pass a 1-week CR by the end of this week to give negotiators more time to finish an agreement by the holidays. So don't be discouraged this week when it looks like a punt when they do the 1-week CR. Funding bills aren't fun usually, and they usually involve, in this case, agreeing to pay for things they've already agreed to spend money on. But this time we have something really important hiding in the bill, which is that Electoral Count Act reform. This is the thing that Donald Trump used to try to steal the 2020 election. And we pointed out yesterday on our Substack that it actually seems likely this would pass after Senator Amy Klobuchar, who is the Rules Committee chair, said in an interview, we will get this done by the end of the year if we have to slow everything else down. It's going to happen. But Klobuchar's a Democrat, and we need 10 Republicans to join the Democrats to pass anything in the Senate, which is why it's very encouraging that Greg Sargent pointed out in his column there is, quote, a big reason for optimism. It's unlikely Schumer would have announced the ECA reform will be on the omnibus if Mitch McConnell hadn't privately indicated his assent. People close to the process tell me. That's the end of his quote. Senator Collins' version of this bill, yes, that's right, Susan Collins, would only allow one slate of recognized electors as chosen by the governor of each state. It clarifies the role of the vice president in the electoral vote process. It raises the objection threshold, and it provides a judicial review so legislatures and officials can't refuse to certify the results. In other words, if this passes, boom. We are currently still using the law passed in 1887, also known as the point in time to which the Republican Party is trying to send women. So the League of Women Voters has this history of the ECA, which I'll read you. This is a few paragraphs on it, but I think it's really interesting how sometimes our government is so dysfunctional. We are still using this law that was passed in 1887. So here is a little bit from them on the history. Currently, this process is governed by a law passed in 1887 called the Electoral Count Act, the ECA. The ECA was passed to set up a formal counting procedure for electoral votes following the 1876 presidential election, which saw states submit multiple slates of electors, and where a deadlock in electoral votes left Congress unable to resolve the election for several weeks. The 1880 and 1884 elections that followed were also close and forced Congress to put legislation that would put procedures in place to resolve future election disputes. How the ECA was used to challenge the 2020 election. Fast forward to 2021, when lawyers and supporters of former President Trump attempted to use the ECA's ambiguities to challenge the results of the 2020 election. The loopholes they tried to exploit included persuading Vice President Pence to throw out votes of electors and recruiting slates of fake electors from states where Joe Biden had been declared the winner and the electoral slate had been certified in his favor. These constitutional and political challenges all played out while thousands of insurrectionists rioted at the U.S. Capitol, broke into the chambers of the U.S. House and Senate, and threatened the lives of members of Congress. That's the end of their history. Readers of Politicus USA most likely recall with some horror the fate of prior funding bills ever since the Republican Party started holding the country hostage under former President Obama in order to get legislative wins that they couldn't get fairly. It's often been a countdown to the holidays and a game of chicken when there is a Democratic president to be foiled. But perhaps Democrats have finally wised up. Perhaps this is the year Susan Collins finally does something to earn that moderate badge she was awarded by the press for unclear reasons. This year has already offered up hard-won hope for our democracy, thanks to the work of each individual voter showing up and making their voices heard in the midterms and special elections across the country. If we end it with a reformed Electoral Count Act, we can all breathe a huge sigh of relief. Yes, there is so much more work to be done to protect democracy, but one part of that work is appreciating the work that is done, especially when, by some miracle, it's bipartisan and actually good for the country. More of this, please, Santa. This is Sarah Jones with the Politicus Pod for Politicus USA's The Daily. This podcast is put up on our Substack with show notes. You can go to the Substack and read if you are interested in reading more about from any of these sources. And we are getting closer and closer to the holidays, so please consider gifting a subscription to someone, maybe even a relative who might need a little assistance in the way they're thinking, in hopes for a new year with less and less people being radicalized by far-right misinformation. So thank you so much, you guys, for tuning in today, and I will talk to you tomorrow.